Good morning it is for me. It might be afternoon for you. Thank you for the opportunity to present. We're going to talk today about root cause analysis. It's titled Think Again, hopefully to get you thinking around a different way of approaching this. So many times we do things the same way and don't get the results we'd like. Again, my name is Kevin Stewart. I'm with ARMS Reliability. We're a reliability consulting company, and we also have the contract to do Apollo root cause analysis training. Okay. Already a problem. Oh, there it is. Table of contents, the slide pack, what we're going to talk about today. I want to have a little bit of an introduction to hopefully convert your thinking process a little bit to say if we're going to do this, we have to do it slightly differently. Then I want to talk about 8 key elements of a sustainable root cause analysis program. This is kind of based on some experience I had at Alcoa and also with some of the clients that we're looking at and have been helping along the way. Also want to talk about how you make that sustainable. And also along with sustainability, a little bit about auditing, which I'm sure the quality folks are very familiar with, but we'll talk about it anyway. I want to start off also with a poll. That's what it's going to be, and I'm going to open that up in a second. So I've opened a poll up. I'm going to launch it, sorry. At 70%, continue to go up a little bit. Okay, it slowed down, so I'm going to close the poll. And I would like to share the results. Not showing on my screen. It showed that a fair number of people say that we have a process but don't get to the true root cause. A big percentage of that. So hopefully you might this presentation that might help you understand what that's all about. So we'll go through that. So what I'm hoping to do is talk a little bit about a new way of thinking that might get at why sometimes we don't get what we're looking for out of the program even though we have it. So I want to talk a little bit about a new way of thinking. And we have to do that slightly differently. I'm sure we've all heard of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And I saw this in, I did work for Alcoa for 34 years. I saw this in a large corporation many times where we tried to implement an initiative and it didn't work so well. So the next time we try to put one in, we do the same thing and it still didn't work. Surprise, surprise. And we kept expecting that it would. So we were not taking advantage of the fact that we needed to do something different. The corollary to that, by the way, is that if you haven't heard that, doing different things all the time and expecting the same results. We actually did have some success inside our company, implementing some initiatives, but then the next time we'd have one, we would try doing it differently and still wouldn't get the same results. So interestingly enough. So the point here is we have to think differently about the whole process or we're never going to make the advances that we need to. So basically, if we don't do something different, we're going to stay in the rut. And for those of you who may have heard that, the definition of a rut is a coffin with the ends kicked out. So that's not a good thing. We're trying to get away from that. And I think the issue there is this. I've seen this picture before, and I love it. It's a picture of breakfast, but there's two animals involved in this breakfast. There's a chicken and a pig. Now, the chicken was involved in breakfast, but the pig was committed. And I think that's a big part of what happens to why our initiatives don't happen the way we'd like them to. Many of us, or many companies, they get involved in this, but they don't get committed. By way of supporting that, there was a study done by a gentleman. I looked all over trying to find the name and a few things, but I remember the concept because it was so important. It was about the implementation of SAP, and he found out that there were basically, it wasn't an even distribution. It was bimodal. They either failed or they were successful, very few in between. And he found out that if you assumed that putting in SAP was just a software installation and you just put it in and turn it on and it works, that's essentially the same thing as being involved. And they found out that those people failed. The ones that were successful were the ones who said, this is not just about putting in a new maintenance program or a new SAP software. It was about a new paradigm or a new shift in the way I think about things. Those folks were successful. So I bring that up because I believe it's the same way with any initiative, but specifically what we're talking about here is the RCA system. You have to be committed, as based on the other picture that you saw. If you're committed, it changes the way you think about things, and you will be successful. Continue on with the introduction. I want to point out that this RCA program is not going to be quick, not going to be easy. If it was, you'd already done it. Many times we get involved with folks, we used to get involved with them, and they would give away information and everything. You'd say, why would you do that? They said, well, it's okay because it's so hard, you're not going to do it anyway. So you have to be committed to get by that. If you're going to be successful, you're not going to be successful if it's done the same way as other initiatives that fail. So let's remember the definition of insanity. You have to do something different. It is hard, very difficult. It's time-consuming, multi-year. That's probably one of the biggest things that people don't recognize. You can't just decide to do this and have it happen in 6 months. It's going to be a multi-year project. So somebody has to be in charge who's going to be there for a long time. It's necessary to communicate all the time. Make sure everybody knows what's in it for them, what's coming up, what the advantages are, all that information. It's also necessary to track and show the value, otherwise people won't see it. And it is very, very, very valuable to your organization. We have lots of data. I have some from Alcoa and some other places that show that the returns on investment for these kinds of things are extremely high, in the thousands of %, which may seem unusual, but the information that I have and tracked from Alcoa was along those lines also. So it's very, very valuable. So in general, remember, when we're talking about this, the definition of insanity continues to apply. We have to think differently about implementing any initiative, but since we're talking about root cause analysis, specifically this one, you got to remember that not everybody knows what you know, so you have to tell them, part of the communication issue. One of the biggest things we talk about in root cause analysis and the training that we do is that not everybody has, there is no such thing as a single reality. So the assumption is everybody knows what we know, but they don't, if they came from different areas and places. So you have to make sure that they understand the difference. And the biggest thing, you have to decide to be committed, not just involved. In my experience, when I took the training, it wasn't going along so well. I finally saw that slide, but that's the issue. Decided to become committed, and all of a sudden we started making great strides in our root cause analysis. But also recognize you have to keep a long-term focus both on the program and if you want a cultural shift where everyone gets involved. So this program shouldn't be attempted by somebody who expects to just put it online and disappear. You have to stay with it and keep after it for multiple years to get it involved and instituted. Okay, let's have another quick poll. About 50%. About 75%, trickling up. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. There's still a few trickling in here. A lot of people say yes, they have a formal written program. That's great. But we've also got a fair number that have one, but it isn't written. Some that say it's not documented, and 10% say they don't have a program at all. So there'll be some good information for you in this program. So let's talk about the elements of a root cause analysis program. We'll mention all 8 of them, and then we'll talk about the individual ones at some length. Number 1, an involved sponsor or program champion. And notice I had the word involved here. It's not just a sponsor, but it has to be an involved sponsor. That's a big issue that we found. We're going to need a resourcing plan complete with a program champion and trained investigators. This is something a little different. A lot of people put in place an initiative, but they don't talk about who's going to do it, how much time it's going to take. They might talk about who, but they won't talk about how much time. They don't plan for the resources. They don't put a plan in place for all that. They just say, let's do this on top of your other job. We'll need clear trigger mechanisms to clarify what needs to be investigated. I'm finding more and more now that a lot of companies do have trigger mechanisms of some kind to determine when they should do an analysis. We'll need clear protocols for the collection and preservation of evidence and information. In the quality side of things, if you're on the reliability side, it's probably important. If you're in the conformance or quality issues, that might not be as big a deal, but there's still some things that can be done. Still need documents, information, other pieces that can help you. You're going to need a standard reporting process. This helps you with across the company environment and enterprise environment. If you have a standard reporting process, you spend a lot less time figuring out where the information is. Also, don't have to interpret it. So there needs to be a standard process. An ironclad, underscored, and bold tracking system that forces resolution of the action items through escalated emails or other methods. Very important to have a system. Make sure that the items that you come up with out of your investigation don't get lost and actually get implemented. That is the entire reason for doing the investigation. You've got a process. You need a process to review the investigations for common cause and possible missed or improvement opportunities. But you do need to look at previous ones to find out if you're making progress or if there's other things that you might be missing in your investigation. And the last element, you have to track the value in some form or another of the program, so you can show that it's providing the value that you want. So let's talk about item number 1, an involved sponsor. I disappeared off my screen. If you have, I'm not sure if anybody has heard. I'm going to assume that some have heard about the sponsored target change agent, but some of you may not have heard about it, so we'll talk about that. In the sponsored target change agent, you have 3 of them. You got a sponsor, a target, and a change agent. In this case, the sponsor says, I want something done, and usually at the target, it could be an area, it could be something, it could be a plant manager as a sponsor, it could be a department head. He says, I need something changed, and it's going to be over here in a specific area, which is the target. And then there'll be a change agent, since the sponsor is usually a higher level person. He doesn't have the time. So he appoints somebody else, a change agent, to make this change. So he goes to the change agent and says, I need this done over here in this area, whether it be a department or a specific area of the plant. So that what happens is the change agent then goes over to the target and says, I'm here to help. And the target says, I don't think so. It puts up a barricade. And then the change agent would say something like, apparently there must be some mistake. The sponsor wants this to be done. And so they go back up to the sponsor and say, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem. So then sometimes the sponsor will help initiate some additional information with the target that says, hey, I need this done, which is great. And now there's some alignment. So the target removes his barrier. That gives the change agent more information or more opportunity to get in and make the change. Then what happens usually is the sponsor disappears. So the sponsor says, great, now I got everything taken care of. He disappears. The change agent continues to try and push this issue. What happens is the target says, hey, sponsor's not there. He's not involved. He doesn't come and see me anymore, so I'm putting up a barricade and I don't want to make this change. That's a very common scenario. A better one is where you look at the same concept, but you say, I've got all three of these folks, and say I got a sponsor, change agent, and target. And they get in a room together. Sponsor says, hey, I want this done. And this guy, this change agent, is going to do this for me over here. And so now everybody's aligned. And what happens is you've got this alignment, and the change agent can then go over and actually do the work. But notice how I've removed the dotted solid line, and the sponsor is now more involved, and he keeps a dotted line, which means you have to show up to the meetings once in a while. You have to ask the target if it's working the way it's supposed to, or talking to the change agent. So it works much better this way, and you'll get much better results. I was not aware of this. I was a change agent, and I found out that that was exactly what was happening, and it worked much better when we did it this way. Sometimes the sponsors don't even know about it, so you have to explain that to them and make sure that they're more involved. So that helps you quite a bit. Make sure you get an involved sponsor. But this guy, this person, must show up at the meetings. Got to ask about progress. Many times our sponsors would just disappear and maybe never ask about that. And that's why some initiatives fail, because they're just never seem to be important. They need to ask to see an analysis. If you're doing root cause analysis, they should be familiar with the concepts. They should be familiar enough with the information. They should know how to ask about them and read them so that they at least can show an understanding. And that basically comes back to the fact that actions speak louder than words. So by showing his involvement, everybody's going to recognize that this was something that we want. I guarantee the program's going to have difficulties if you don't have this involved sponsor. Many times folks would look at it and say, I have a sponsor, but they don't recognize the involved part is very important. I've had sponsors tell me, I don't need to be involved. I told you to do it. That's a difficult situation because that person just doesn't understand that it's important to do that. Second item in your plan to get this done is that you're going to need, is you're going to be in your resourcing plan, which is something that you may or may not have done, especially with root cause analysis. You have to decide who you're going to need. In our case, we're going to say you need a program champion, facilitators, and participants. And you have to decide how much time, what are their job duties, how much, and how is it going to get done. So we have to have that understanding of that and actually write it down and decide how to make that happen. The program champion has several things they got to do. They got to be responsible for the overall program success, especially at the beginning. He can do a lot of work with the involved sponsor, targets, all sorts of folks to make sure it happens, run down barriers, eliminate barriers so it can happen. He's responsible for the training strategy, which process are we going to use, how we're going to implement it, who's going to be involved, all those issues falls on that person's shoulders. There's some coaching and counseling that has to go on. I hate to tell you this, but just going to an investigator training program, in our case a 2-day program, does not make you a good facilitator. There's always some additional information that's being needed and some continuous improvement. So this program champion needs to continually watch, counsel, and coach the facilitators to improve the program. He's also responsible for tracking and reporting the metrics so that you can see the value of the program. And some of your analyses may be sensitive or difficult, and so they may be involved in the sense of, might be important for somebody like that to take on ownership of a specific one that might be sensitive via perhaps a fatality or something that's might end up in punitive damage and punitive reaction to a person. So they might need to be involved for that. Depending on the size of a facility, this person may also be a facilitator to help round out the time that's necessary. Recommend not, but sometimes it's just necessary. What are the duties and responsibilities of a facilitator? They are required to facilitate incidents based on triggers or as asked, or as they determine, but they need to be aware that sometimes they may be asked to do specific things. So there needs to be a system to say that, but they're in charge of the entire system and initiating that and making it happen. They manage the entire investigation, who's involved, the room, how much time, keeping it motivated, keeping it moving along, making sure the information gets back if they can't finish it at one time. Everything that's necessary, they're in charge. They're also responsible for continually improving their skills, which can be done through additional training or also blogs or discussion groups. Surprisingly enough, you should talk about participants. It will take people to do this, sometimes 3 or 4, sometimes 5 or 6, maybe sometimes just 1, but it's necessary. Those folks, they're the ones who are going to provide the information, and they have the causes. So you have to allow for the fact that that's going to be necessary. It's not just going to appear. What about time commitment? Program champion, in general, about a half to full time to start with. You can plan for a year at that level. And then you might say that you can't afford it. I'm going to say wrong. That's the definition of insanity. Since this is so valuable to a company, you can easily justify the cost of a full-time facilitator if they're doing their job right by solving problems. We used to say that our liability engineers should be able to save twice their salaries, and basically were free. And we were able to drive a lot of that thought process down into some of the facilities, so they were getting the reliability folks involved. You should taper off over time as the program takes hold, take more responsibility, and so you can anticipate that it'll be heavy at the beginning and then taper off as it goes along for the program champion. Facilitators, it varies, but the rule of thumb would be about 1/4 of the time or 1 detailed analysis per month. And that includes the report, getting the meetings, arranging things, talking to folks, gathering information, following up with folks about whether or not they've been able to get the information they need, and resetting some things and then putting out the final reports. Time commitments for the participants, you got to be careful about that because you need to spread it out. Sometimes you get a favorite person and they get involved with many investigations, and that takes up a lot of their time. So you need to be careful that you don't overload a particular one. One of the things we used to do in some of our facilities was schedule their time. If they were maintenance or operations folks and needed to be there, they would actually put a job plan together and say, we're going to schedule your time for some of that. One of our best facilities used to have a meeting weekly, and then after that they would put time during the next week to work on weekly investigations so that they knew that that was going on. With this resourcing plan, you have to also ask how you're going to pick these people. Perhaps it's lottery. Perhaps it's the way you picked everyone else. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. A suggestion might be that you use something like the Toyota way, which is define a skill set for the individual personnel and then look for those specific skills and train them. Some of the skills you might consider would be, do they have tenacity? You can't really train that into somebody. Do they have a work ethic? So they have a proven long-term commitment with projects and to stay around for a bunch of time. Or people skills. Depending on what you're looking for, they may be important. So if you find these skills in a person, then you can train them to do just about anything, which is a little different than some of the ways we pick people for certain jobs currently. So that's a little different way of thinking about it too. These people also need training. You've got to put that in the resource plan. The champion is going to need something about root cause analysis, advanced topics, facilitator training, team building, if he's going to be a facilitator, management, that's team building or management, public speaking, interviewing. If they have a lack in those skills, you can train people in that. Facilitators are going to need some training also in the root cause analysis, advanced topics perhaps. They need to continue their skills. And if they want to move up to be the champion someday, they'll have to get some additional training. The participants also need some training. Whatever process you choose, they must understand it so you don't come into a room and nobody knows what the process is, nobody knows what it's all about, whether it's a witch hunt, all those kind of issues. So they need to be they need to understand that. That can be done many different ways, but they do have to have some understanding. Obviously, as a consultant, we'd appreciate the opportunity to help you do the training, but it can be done in-house. Many folks do that. Once you get the process in place, then the champion, the facilitators, and others can provide some training for the participants. The champion and others may need to get some outside training. But inside, for some of the participants and facilitators, a lot of that can be done. And I want another poll, but where is my... There it is. I'll open another poll and launch that. Okay, it looks like we're up to almost 70%. A few more seconds. Looks like the there we go, close that. It looks like 53% say it's not documented. They have a plan, but it's not documented. We used to say if it's not written down, it's not done, so that couldn't be an issue because people might have different opinions about that. And 22% say that they have a documented written program. That's great. It is important to do, and interesting that I'd be interested to know, for those of you who say have at least an understanding of the resource plan, but it's not documented, how do you know that? How do you know what everybody believes about that? So good. Okay, let me put that down. And go down. The third element in the program is triggers. When will you do an analysis?
Kevin, sorry to interrupt, but you're not sharing anymore. You need to either close a poll or...
Oh, all right. Thank you. It says it's closed. So my screen. Oh, it says I'm showing. You're not seeing it, then?
No, I'm seeing the introductory slide. Maybe the
share.
Share, yeah, share my screen again. There you go. There's the poll, so there's the results of the poll.
Oh, okay. So I need to share it to close it out, I guess. Sorry about that. Okay. So that's the results of the poll. And if I hide that, I guess, then, can you see the screen?
We're seeing the introductory screen for the reliability division.
Really? Well, it says I'll do that and then do it again.
That looks good.
Oh, you can see it now?
Yes, you're back on sharing.
Okay. What was that? Okay. So the third element is a trigger. You have to have a system to do that. And it can be informal or formal. You'll have an incident. An informal trigger would be something like this. I used to have a radio on my desk. When production stopped, I'd go out and conduct an analysis. Excuse me. That works very well for small little items. Doesn't need a lot of information, and you can get a lot of good work done. But there's also formal. There's also formal triggers, and hopefully some of you have some formal triggers set up where you have a list of items that you're going to do it on. It might be one or two items. It can be a list of all sorts of things. But when one of those kicks off, you will assemble a team and do an analysis so you can generate the savings that are necessary. One of the ways you can keep track of that, if you have a trigger, is to match the graph scenario. This would be something like number of non-compliances or a downtime trigger. You have it set up, and if you can show that you are having an improvement, that's obviously going to be good for management. Here's a case where every quarter we're saying we used to have a trigger of 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. Now it's 6. This could be number of non-compliances. That's obviously showing that we're making progress in our root cause analysis methodology. So somehow or another, you have to have a trigger and be able to show that you're making it. So let's ask everybody if they have a formal process. Let's launch that. Looking good, about 60% are yes. %60 vote. Give it a few more seconds. 65 and it's tapered off, so let's close that. And then share it. Like 63% have said yes, you have a formal program process, which is good, but almost 40% don't have any way of knowing when to do one. So that means it can be very sporadic, and it's a good idea and opportunity for improvement there. Let's see if I hide that. Hopefully I'm back on to presentation. The fourth element would be that you have to have a preservation of evidence program. People don't throw away evidence because they want to, but they throw it away because they aren't aware that anybody's going to use it. So, for instance, failed bearings, they just get tossed when they're utilized, but that's like a written document about what happened. It's talking to you. So the opportunity for you is to establish some kind of parts graveyard, communicate with everybody, make sure they understand why you're keeping the parts, provide some basic rules about what to keep. Then you need to train everybody, say this is why we're going to do it, and establish that policy. One of the best facilities, one of the best systems I ever saw was a rack where they had days of the week, and every day of the week you would put the failed parts on it. And if you had 7 days to go out and use it, if you didn't, they would pull it off and replace it with that day's failures. So you always had at least 7 days to get your evidence. Simple, easy, systematic, and understandable by everybody. So whatever you do, make sure your evidence doesn't get thrown away. Fifth element, make sure you have standardized reports. So it's an ID system, so you can find things, the dates, has to be simple, investigation details, what happened, who was involved, problem definition, everything you need to know about it, and also something about the significance so everybody knows why you were doing that report. You have to have something about the cost of manpower and standard placement. That standard placement can be in the report and also where the reports are kept, so people can continually look at and review previous reports so they don't have to do work again. So you have to have a standardized system. Sixth element tracking system. It should be based on email. It have features that include a simple transference. It should alert proper people. It should have a due date, escalation features. Others should not be able to complete it. There should be no deletion of the part. I'd be curious, I think I have a poll here to say if you have a tracking system, but it's very important because most RCAs software, the action items get in there, but if they don't get out, they'll never get tracked again. Let's see, I believe I have, yes. Let's see if you have a system. Take a poll real quick. It's like we're headed to a fair number of people have some kind of system. Some say it's effective and some say it's not. It means there's opportunity for improvement. 60% vote. 12% though say there's currently they don't track action items. That's an opportunity for improvement, since you don't know if those would be ever be implemented. Okay, it's tapered off. 6%. Yeah. Want to share that? And hide it. So many of you say you have a system. Some say it's not all that effective, and a fair number say you don't track the items at all. It's a large opportunity for it. But hide that poll. Seventh element, common causes. After you do the analysis, you have to look at them and compare and find common issues. That can be within an individual analysis. There can be common issues associated with a particular analysis, or it can be systemic, which means that I look at several different analyses and find out if there's common systems and issues that might be appropriate for the entire plant. Whichever one you're doing is important, but you have to have a methodology and a system and a process to ensure that gets done. Otherwise, they get tucked away in a corner, they never get looked at, and opportunities are going to be missed. Last element is tracking value. Most companies would use ROI, return on investment. That's relatively easy to do. The standard equation would be the cost savings over the investment times 100. To accomplish this, all you have to do is track the manpower, cost of the solution, and the savings for each one. That will allow you to calculate this kind of number. Got a small sample here real quick. There's the equation. Investigation might be a team of 4 for 2 meetings in 4 hours. There's their cost. This is the cost of the solution, whatever it might be. In our case, we'll say it was $2,000 coming back from a project that I did. And the cost savings. How much did this item save the company? We're going to say $40,000 a year. It was pretty easy to calculate the return on investment, which is what the large management folks like to look at. And that is 40,000 divided by the 4,400, which is 9.09 to 909%. Most managers would probably jump at a 900% return on investment. Most of the projects they see are much, much less than that. So you can see how simple it is if you capture some of that data to allow you to do that. Another way to show value is just track it. This is actual real data that I collected with Alcoa. We used to track the cumulative savings, and you can see over the years it was very valuable. And we were showing upwards of $8 million a year on a cumulative basis that we were saving, and that was very valuable. And some of the plants were able to use that to hire additional reliability folks at a time when hiring was frozen, because they basically were able to say for free. One more poll, last poll. do you track the value? Launch. Might be an opportunity here. Looks like a lot of folks are saying they don't know the value of the RCA program. So even though you have one of the issues we used to say was the first thing they're going to do is say, why should I keep you? Why should I keep reliability folks around? The program or the process is working just fine. So one of the issues became we needed to tell them what the value was so that they understood that. Okay, it looks like it's tapered off. So let me close that and then share it. So you can see a fair number of people are saying they don't know what the value of the RCA program is, so that might be an opportunity for improvement. Okay, just a couple of quick questions, a couple of quick slides about sustainability and the audit. For those of you who might not have heard about that, second order change is deciding or being forced to do something significantly or fundamentally different from what we've done before. The process is irreversible. Once you begin, it's possible to return the way you were doing it before. This is important because if you put in a program and you don't stay with it long enough, many times if you disappear or somebody doesn't, or a champion goes away, then you fall back into your old ways of doing it. So in order to make it sustainable, you have to achieve second order change. Some of that is just associated with time. It takes approximately 3 years to that point. You have to stay with us long enough. So if you put it out, do it for a short period of time, and don't, and then just say, great, it'll be around forever. That's not true. It's going to take some time to focus on that. You got to keep an eye out for the second order change to make sure it's accomplished. That way you can ensure that you will have a sustainable program. A couple of quick examples. When we put in the computerized maintenance management system at our facility, nobody wanted it. We had troubles. We pushed it, but I kept with it. I was implementing reliability for almost 10 years. And after we finally got to the point in the CMS implementation where I asked myself, if I went away, would this still stay here? And the answer was yes. I looked, and it was about 3 years. So it is important to stay with it long enough or get somebody involved that's going to be there long enough to make sure you can achieve the second order change. The GE example I think is interesting because you also have to make sure it's not involved with a particular person. The comment I have about that is when Jack Welch retired from GE, nothing negative about Mr. Welch, but I think I had stock in it. The stock took a tank. And that appeared like Jack was a very big part of the sustainability of that. So it wasn't necessarily embedded in the way we do business. So you have to make sure it's not involved around an individual also when you're trying to get sustainability. You might ask why it takes 3 years. I'm not sure I can answer that scientifically, but I believe that it's associated with something about people look at it and say, after about 2 years, they say, I guess it's not going away. So that means if I don't help them do a good job, they're going to stuff something down their throat. So they finally get involved. Last thing to talk about for your program, make sure it's sustainable, would be to make sure you audit this. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But you have to ensure it never changes. Even though you put it in place, you have to come back and look at it once in a while and check for some things. In your RCA program, some of the things you can look at would be, are they doing how many investigations have been done? Maybe they haven't adjusted their triggers. Are the action items being taken care of? But has there been a % reduction in the trigger? Our adherence measures means, are they following the process? Are they filling out the forms? Are they putting them where they're supposed to be? Are they adhering to the process? And then obviously look at it and say, are you getting the return on investment for your program that you want to get? Inside Alcoa, even though we had our own internal audits, in specific cases, we required external audits. In the case of crane maintenance, even though we did very good at it, we also insisted every 3 years an external auditor would come in. The reason for that was to get a second set of eyes or an additional set of eyes, because if we are doing the program the way we do it, we probably don't know we're doing it incorrectly. So an external set of eyes coming in would help us make sure that we aren't missing certain critical items. So I'm always a big fan of saying you don't need to have external audits every year, but certainly once in a while, it's a good idea to have an external set of eyes look at that. So those two things, the second order change and the audit, will help you make sure it's sustainable over time. And I believe, as a conclusion, review what we talked about. You have to establish the plan, base it on a minimum of 3 years. Review those 8 elements, modify to fit your needs. Not one program doesn't fit all things. Make sure you get an involved sponsor. Have a clear resourcing plan about how you're going to get it done. You need to set triggers. Make sure you put in an evidence preservation program of some kind. Have a standard reporting system. Establish an action tracking system so that they don't get stuck, and that was a big issue for the folks who are not sure if that's the case. Review for common causes, because sometimes you can do individual analyses and get good results, but after reviewing several of them, you might find some things that don't show up in individual analyses. And then you can track the value of the savings, which is very important to make sure you stay involved or you continue the programs. And then make it all sustainable. Pretty simple. And don't forget to do your other job too, because many times this is always around adding something to somebody's workload as opposed to a separate item. And with that, I'll ask if there's any questions. Got a few minutes left.
Thanks, Kevin. I could pose some questions on behalf of the audience. John had asked a question about the sponsor. Should the sponsor be involved or committed?
Yeah, he needs to be. Actually, that's an interesting question. I think he has to be committed to the program, but then the involvement is the sense that he has to show that he's there. So he has to be committed to the program, but he has to show involvement in the sense of being involved in the process and the people and all that.
Then we have another question from Rivaldo on root cause analysis process. Who should be defined as the sponsor?
High level, if it's done correctly, the plant manager should be the sponsor. At the next level, my personal opinion, the places where I've seen it done best is somebody on the operations side if you're in an industrial facility. And the reason for that is that if you have a facility, you're making a product of some kind, then if the operations doesn't work, you don't make money. And the ones that have been pushed the best are the ones who have the most need for it to work. So the operations folks should be the drivers of that if you can arrange that. It can work if it's done through the maintenance or reliability side, but the true driver should be the operations. They should be the sponsors, whether it be a department head or a production manager or something like that.
Okay, then we have another question here from David. Who has the last word on determination of the intermediate cause or root cause validity? Who does technical evaluation of the suggestions which the team members may have? Does the facilitator provide technical information on causes, check based on his own investigation or based on his personal knowledge, expertise, objective data he had obtained?
That's a long question. I don't see if I can get that right. But if I understand that right, it basically says the question is around how do we make sure that whoever's making the suggestion or whatever that suggestion is, that it's going to do answer the problem. The difficulty I have with that one is that the way the Apollo process works is that we put a chart together and we show the interconnection of how it happened. So when you propose a solution, whatever it is, it's pretty easy to look and say, will this solve the problem? And so the fact that there's technical expertise required would not necessarily be there. Anybody can look at it and say, if I do something about this particular cause, I can see how it's going to interrupt that, and it makes sense. And you can ask the question, will this solve the problem? But the answer becomes one of looking at the chart and saying, well, if this is the true cause and effect relationship, pretty easy to see that. But we don't normally get involved or get those kind of questions just because of the way our process works. I hope that if I didn't answer the question, you can come back.
Okay. Then we have a couple of inputs from Jason. Would you share an RCA document or a benchmark reference, or would you share your RCA program document? And I'm not sure what supporting documents you have. I think he's looking for something in an example.
Yeah, I believe we can do that. We have some guidelines about how you would do an RCA. We have some things about how you set up a program, that kind of information. So I believe we can set that up. I'd have to get with our Apollo manager and I think they'd have to convert that a little bit to make it like in a PDF document. But I think we can do that. So I can certainly inquire and make it available.
Okay. We have a question.
And basically, I have two kinds. One would be a how you do consultations. Another one is literally a program definition guide and what are the things that are necessary. So I'm assuming he's looking more for the program outline, if you want to call it that. So that's the one I'll put together.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
We have a question from John. What methodologies are recommended for actually performing the RCA?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, since ARMS is the Apollo, it's the Apollo root cause analysis method instructor and trainers and worldwide supporters of that. So I would obviously say that is the one that we would recommend. There are others out there, and I will not say that they're bad or anything like that. You have to look at those ones, but we'd obviously entertain anybody who wanted to do that. So we sponsor and teach the Apollo root cause analysis method, but there are several others out there that are cause and effect based, and people use them all the time.
Very good. And then there was a question asking if you could give another example of the return on investment calculation. Maybe they just want to see that slide again.
Oh, if they'd just like to see that slide, yeah, we can do that to see if I can get.
And while you're moving off of there, I'll pose the next question, which is a comment from Rodolfo saying that as reliability engineers, we all have an idea of how beneficial can be an RCA program. However, without commitment by leadership, any program will fail. What process would you recommend that we follow to convince our leadership of the importance of an RCA program? And what if the company has a global operation environment?
I think, if I understand that right, when I was listening to that, the first thing that popped in my mind was, just like any other place, show me the money. My experience was you could tell them all sorts of things, you can do all sorts of things, it didn't matter. We're in business to make money, so the folks that are going to drive the process are always about the money. So if you aren't tracking the value, or if you aren't showing them a value, the only thing they care about is that. So whether it's ROI or dollars saved, if you want their support, that's what they will support. So you have to get a process, a letter, something involved, a newsletter of some kind showing that the numbers saved. I showed that graph one time. One of our plants literally went to them and said, look how much money we've saved you. Here it is, documented, black and white. And they were on a hiring freeze. The plant manager looked at that and said, wow, it doesn't cost me anything? And they went, yeah. So they said, fine, give me another one. So it's all about the money. That's the basics there. So if you can get them involved and show them the money, they'll probably follow you anywhere. I think there was a second part. I'm not sure I would capture that.
Yeah, I think you covered it. There was a question here from Sarah. Do you recommend the 8D methods? Why or why not?
Well, you kind of broke up a little bit. I missed the question.
This was a question relative to the 8D method. Do you recommend it? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Oh, I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that one. When you say it was an 8E as in elephant?
8D as in David?
Oh, 8D. Doesn't matter what the letter is. I still have to plead ignorance. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the 8D process. So I think I can answer that question.
I might be able to add some value to that, Kevin. The 8D process, step 4, requires that you do a root cause analysis. So in answering the question, you still need a methodology for doing the RCA. The 8D is only a problem-solving step-by-step approach. So step number calls for the root cause.
Yeah, if you talk about that, it's like there's some other ones in the black belt system. You look at the black belt system, if that's the same kind of thing. They require root cause analysis, but they don't tell you what kind to do, so it sounds like the same thing. So obviously, if the answer to that for us would be, we would recommend the Apollo process, obviously.
So here's a question from Phil. He says, this was centered around equipment or production-related issues or problems. We have issues in new product development. Suggest the slides cover this in the future to be more encompassing.
Good point. We actually had worked with a company when they were talking about product. It was literally about product development. We actually did some things with them about that. So we found out that it does work for that, but that would be a good idea. Appreciate the input.
Mm-hmm. Question here from Caleb. Should a sponsor require a time limit for implementation of a corrective measure to encourage prompt resolution of quality issues?
I say yes. We always, in our solution, in our program, it requires an owner and a due date. So yes, because it drives everybody. It's interesting to me when we put in owners to problems, they're okay with that. Everybody will sign up for that. But then when I ask them, but I need a due date, it's amazing how it changes everybody's thought process. They go, oh my God, now I actually have to do this? Okay, wait a minute, let me think about this. So a due date is very, very important. Forces everybody to think differently.
Very good. And one more question from David. Who is responsible for the final report? Is it the facilitator or is it a appointed chief analyst?
No, I would say the facilitator should own that report as the output of the facilitation. I would also say that the program champion or some higher level person should be looking at that on a regular basis to verify that the quality is continuing on, because we've seen many times that just because you go to a class and can facilitate and do all that doesn't mean that the quality is there. So you need to have somebody kind of keeping an eye on that too. So the facilitator should have the ultimate responsibility for the and ownership of the output of the investigation.
Very good. Then Myra makes a comment saying that standard report is very important and agrees totally that you have to be consistent from one to the next so that people can read the reports. And there was a question about RUs. For this webinar, you can submit for RUs with the acceptance at the registration, and then after you attend the webinar, there's another email that comes to you that tells you that you're thanked for being a participant, and those would be used to submit. I don't see any other questions on the question board, and we're at the hour, Kevin, so let me thank you on behalf of our audience and on behalf of the ASQ Reliability Division for presenting and sharing your expertise, and we hope that you'll come back and share with us in the future.
We'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'm going to shut down the webinar. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, bye. Thank you.